Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. Welcome to GSC's May Travelogue. I'm Joe with the GSC office, and I'll be moderating today. If this is your first time with us, then welcome and thanks for being here. Our presenter today is Gene Flynn, and he will be presenting on Croatia. Gene has spent 35 years in sales and marketing positions at major tech firms, followed by 7 years teaching marketing at Harper College. In addition to giving presentations at libraries and senior groups, he volunteers at nonprofit Barrington Career Center and serves on the board of the Institute for Continued Learning at Roosevelt University. Gene holds a BA degree from Loyola University, an MA from NIU, and an MBA from the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Gene has an article on Lyon, France in the 2023 issue of the journal Illinois Geographer. Before we begin, if anyone has questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will go over them at the end. Gene, thank you again for being here and feel free to take it away.
Well, thank you, Joe. I'm delighted to be here and return to the Geographic Society. So today we have a really interesting topic. It's exploring the country of Croatia. And this is a country that relatively few Americans go to unless they're on a cruise ship. You know, most of the time a cruise ship might often stop here, but there's so much more than just the coastline of Croatia. So we'll be jumping in and looking at it broadly. So here we go. So I've been to Croatia 3 times, twice on a cruise ship and once on a bus tour that was part of a singing group with the Chicago Master Singers. So in April of 2023, but basically 2 years ago, and Nancy and I were on a 21-day cruise that began in Barcelona and ended in Athens. And we had 2 stops in Croatia, among many stops in Italy, and then others in Greece, and at least one in France. And we were on the Viking Sky, this wonderful ocean cruise ship, and it was a wonderful ship, but its maiden voyage in 2019, the Viking Sky did have some issues. So it was a brand new ship, and it was sailing west of Norway in rough weather, and the engines shut down, and the engine notice was saying it's out of oil. The engine was out of oil. Well, it turns out it wasn't out of oil, but the signals, the maintenance signals said it was out of oil, so the engines shut itself down. So the passengers on the ship spent 2 days before the ship could be towed to a port, and there were several people that this ship was rocking because of the storm, but if a ship doesn't have motion, the rocking of the ship is going to be all the more extensive, and so many people were ill. The plates were flying all over, and they had to evacuate some people by helicopter that had medical conditions. So it was not a great first voyage, but the time we were on, it was absolutely delightful. So here we are at sunset. There's Nancy and I, and we're going to be looking at Croatia from a historical point of view. We're going to be covering the culture, but we're going to start in Roman times and move up to current times. So here is Croatia. It has an odd map format because it has extensive land along the Adriatic Sea, and then as it goes north, it moves eastward, and Zagreb, which is up there near Slovenia, that's actually the capital of Croatia. And so Croatia has the land along the Adriatic, and then to the east is Bosnia-Herzegovina, and that is typically there's mountains in between, but between Croatia and there we see Sarajevo. That's a mountainous region in between, which is why Croatia has the low-lying land near the Adriatic. So Croatia, a population of about 4 million people. almost 700,000 living in Zagreb. So 1 out of 5 Croatians live at the capital. So, and here we see a map showing the many different regions of Croatia. And there's what we might consider 4 different states and then subdivisions within some of the states. And we'll be talking about that because each of the region, there are some differences and there's some traditional native outfits that they wear, historic and different crops, and actually the area along the Adriatic is going to be very different than the areas that are farther north and east. Those areas are going to be more mountainous, and so from a geographic point of view, they're going to be very different. So I think if there's one message about Croatia, it's a small country in between the East and West. And this has been true for thousands of years. So even back in Roman times, it was part of 2 different Roman provinces. So we had, so it was divided. And even in Roman periods and later Roman periods, it was in the middle between the Western Empire out of Rome and the Eastern Empire out of Constantinople. And that's been part of its history for thousands of years. So here's a picture from the cruise ship. So we're arriving in Split, and this would be basically the exact same thing a Roman ship captain would see 2,000 years ago, arriving into the port of Split, and the mountains in the background, and the hills and the foothills, and the very pleasant shoreline. And here is the town of Split. And this dates back over 2,000 years to 300 BC. It was a very active town, and with beautiful blue waters that we see here. So one of Croatia's oldest cities. And back in AD, the AD 285, the Emperor Diocletian, he was here, and he said this would be a beautiful place to have a palace and a fortress. And so even during his emperorship, he had this enormous palace built. It's both palace and a fortress. And you can see from this drawing that his ship could come over from Italy, which was less than 100 miles away. It could sail over here, and he could drop him off right at the water line. There was an entryway to the palace right from the water. So even if there was an enemy army, in other parts, he could still get in and out based on the power of Rome and coming in by ship. So here we have the palace, and the beauty of Split is the palace is still there. And here's what what Split, a bird's eye view of Split today. So if you look at the center of this photograph, immediately to the right of the center is the same palace that Diocletian built. Now, so they've added a lot more buildings to the left and buildings at the top and on the right, but the palace itself, remarkably, is still there. Now they added into the land. They created more land that was part of the waterway. So they've added more land so they could have a road and have some restaurants and some piers there. But the palace itself is still there in its glory, and we'll have wonderful pictures of that. So here we are. This is the under portion of the palace, and in a palace of this size, this enormous palace, you have to have a very large substructure to hold up the weight and the size of the palace. So here we have the underneath part, and we're walking through here. And here's Nancy. This is one of the part of the substructure, and this could be used even in Roman times. they could have had wine here. They could have foods so that wheat in storage, so that if there was an emergency, the people could live in the palace, in the fortress for a number of months until a rescue occurred. So, but an enormous understructure. And our tour guide explained that 60 years ago, they really wanted to, with the fall of communism, they really wanted to spruce this up and make it a much bigger tourist attraction. So they cleaned out hundreds and hundreds of years of rubbish and things that were stored here to have this very clean clean storage areas. Here's more. So all of this was covered with hundreds and hundreds of years of stuff that had been stored that was probably rotten, and so they had a huge effort to clear it out. So it's really pristine today. Now here we are on the upper level in the fortress itself, and the picture on the left is a picture of the Temple of Jupiter. And this dates back almost 2,000 years to 295 AD. And in the center is a picture of that temple today. And it's a small temple. This is, you could have, 40 or 50 people inside, and it would start to feel very crowded. And this temple was saved even in when Christianity became the official religion, because they turned it into a church. And it became a church in honor of John the Baptist. And in many cases, the Roman temples were destroyed, or they were taken apart for people to use the bricks to build something else. But here, this was preserved, which is wonderful, because this was 2,000 years old. And here we are up near that temple and near a large Christian church. But this is still these buildings, the heart of these buildings go back to the Roman period. And this city was used very extensively for the movie set for the Game of Thorns back that 9-year run of as a wonderful series. And here we have there's a lady holding up a red sign that says 21. So she's leading one of the Viking tours, and so we'd follow her along, and would have little earpieces so that we could hear her talking without her having to shout. So here we are wandering through the upper town. Here's a couple of reenactors. So they're portraying Roman soldiers and having fun with the children. So everyone seemed throughout Croatia, people were wonderful, enjoying wonderful warm weather, and just having a wonderful good time. Here we are walking down another block, and again we see these buildings in the center. These are untouched from Roman periods. In some cases, they put a new surface on the side of the buildings, but these buildings here would be essentially how they looked 2,000 years ago, without any upgrade. Now, in the back area, so if we came in on the water side, if we walked through the complex and went out the back door, we saw this enormous statue. And this is a statue to Gregory of Nym. And you can see how large it is in context with the people standing by the foot. And Gregory was a Croatian Catholic bishop, and he strongly supported the use of the Croatian language in religious services. And so he thought the Mass should be said in the local language, and the Bible read in the local language. Well, so the Pope and other bishops didn't like this. They wanted Latin to be the standard across Christianity. So they reassigned him to a different diocese. They kind of got him out of town. However, he's remembered for helping to standardize the Croatian language. And that's very important, because even when we think of English, until Chaucer was writing the Canterbury Tales, there were 3 or 4 or 5 different versions of spelling of English, and he helped standardize by writing that very popular book. And so he played a key role in standardizing the English language. And Gregory of Nym did the same thing. So he's honored there for his contribution to the Croatian culture. Now here we are in the front of the complex of the fortress, and this is the land that was added. And we got off a bigger boat, our cruise ship, and we walked through a parking lot. And up here we have a whole series of very nice restaurants where you could sit and have a lunch or dinner, or have a wonderful glass of wine. Here's a close-up. And here I am with having a glass of wine. We did not have a meal. This was just kind of a short chance to relax and drink some delicious red Croatian wine. And it's a beautiful wine glass. And here with a tall glass with a very narrow stem. And after I paid, I got up and I put my backpack on and I turned around, and unfortunately I knocked over the glass and it broke. And I felt very bad. And I looked over at the server, and he just kind of raised his hands and said, "Oh, things happen, but we don't worry about it." So he just said, "Have a great day." So it's a very relaxed atmosphere. Just one example of how such a warm welcome and a relaxed atmosphere. Just a note on the shirt I'm wearing. It's not the most glamorous shirt, but this is when I travel in Europe, I try to travel and wear things that I can wash easily overnight and that they'll dry quickly. So if this were a cotton shirt, you could never wash it and dry it overnight. This was the polyester or rayon. So almost everything I wear, I can wash and pack light, because when you're traveling, particularly when you're traveling on your own with local trains, you have to basically have one suitcase, like a airplane carry-on size suitcase that you can put under the seat in front of you. Now, if you're on a Viking ship or a Viking riverboat or another situation like that, you could bring as much luggage as you want. They take it from the airport and look after it. But if you're traveling independently, you really have to think about how to pack light. So here I want to move from the Roman period to the Middle Ages. And so Croatia was part of the Roman Empire. With the demise of the Western Roman Empire, they still were part of the Eastern Empire, but by 925, they were an independent country, but still protected by the Byzantine Empire out of Constantinople. So that was so again, they were protected by a larger. Later, they were protected by the Republic of Venice, because Venice became the superpower of the Mediterranean, and small Croatia realized we need protection from a larger firm. By the early 1800s, they were part of the Habsburg monarchy that was headquartered in Vienna. And there is the emblem of the Habsburg Empire there on the right. Now, to represent this Middle Ages, we're heading to Dubrovnik. And here we are approaching Dubrovnik at dawn. And here, it's an amazingly beautiful city. These are city walls that were built by the Venetians when they were the ruler of the Mediterranean. And here, this is the water tank from the Middle Ages. So water from the mountains could be stored here and be distributed into the center of Dubrovnik. And it's a wonderful meeting place, because you enter the city walls just to the left here. So this is a wonderful meeting place if you are scheduled to meet a friend. And here are the walls of Dubrovnik. And the walls of Dubrovnik, if you walk the entire length, it's about 1.4 miles surrounding the old town. And these are these were defensive walls, and every 50 yards or 60 yards, there might be a spot for a lookout and for a cannon. So they could be defending the town in the Middle Ages. And today it's just a beautiful place to walk. Now, I was here 15 years ago, and you could walk the walls for five euros, like about $6. And now they charge $35 to walk the wall. And part of that is to raise money to keep them and maintain them. But it's also part, if you had so many people walking those walls, it would get very crowded and to take away the fun and maybe even be dangerous. So, by having a higher price, it limits the crowd. So they may walk the wall one day, where if it was only $5, people might walk the wall 2 or 3 days and create a much bigger crowd. So it's a way to promote crowd control. So here we are in center Dubrovnik, so where you are surrounded by the walls. There's 2 main streets that are parallel, and then there's a lot of cross streets that are very, very narrow. So up here on the left, that shows one of the cross streets. On the right, this shows one of the main streets, the main avenues. And there's no cars here. Maybe at night they do some deliveries with cars and trucks, but during the day it's all pedestrian. And as you can see from this picture, that's a young crowd. And Croatia is a very young country in terms of population size, and people travel through their country, and it was just enjoying wonderful late April weather in the town. And as in Greece and many other southern countries, lots of dining outside. So this is kind of a wide cross street. Some of them are much narrower, but even in a narrower one, restaurants will put 4 or 5 tables outside. So they might have some tables inside, but the weather is so pleasant for so much of the year that having half their restaurant population and their customers sitting outside is a wonderful trade-off. And so here I walked around outside the walls, looking down at the port where people have these private boats, and up in the center right, you see some ships that will take people off to nearby islands. And there's a closer view of that. So there's wonderful islands, and many people from Europe might go and spend a week out at the island, basically just relaxing in the sun. They're just small hotels there, so you could have either a day trip or maybe spending 4 or 5 days out on one of the islands, just relaxing. Now here is an image of Dubrovnik, and this is talking. I want to talk a minute about the breakup of Yugoslavia. So the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, and so shortly after that, Croatia declared independence from Yugoslavia, which they were one of the regions within Yugoslavia. And so in the Serbia, which was the largest country, with the largest region or state within Yugoslavia, they and their army really resisted the independence movement in Croatia. So eventually the Serbian army came, and because they could sit up on the hills overlooking Dubrovnik, they were able to lob shells and mortars into town and destroyed many of the buildings, destroyed almost all the roofs of the buildings, but many of the buildings, the walls themselves, and many people died in that process. So it was a very horrific time within Dubrovnik. And here you could see, if you had Serbian soldiers up here with mortars, how easy it would be to send mortar shells into the town. And in my first time in Dubrovnik 15 years ago, the guide pointed out all the pink roofs, and he said there's a few roofs that look dark, Those are the roofs that survived from the shelling in 1991, and the vast majority of the roofs were the new pink roofs after the damage had been repaired. And here we have a lift, looked like a ski lift, but this can take you from the center of Dubrovnik up to the hills overlooking Dubrovnik for another wonderful view. So at this point, I want to move on to Zagreb, the capital of Croatia. So just some history here, because here we're getting into more modern history. So in the 17th to the 20th century, the Habsburg emperors out of Vienna ruled Zagreb and ruled Croatia. So they were part of the Habsburg Empire. And in the 20th century, we had the Yugoslav period. And then from 1991 to present, we have independent Croatia. And again, not only is it east and west from empires, it's between the Roman Catholic West and the Orthodox East. So they're right in the middle and have tensions from both sides. So part of the modern history is the story of Franz Joseph, who was the emperor of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. And the picture here is of the marriage in 1851 to Elizabeth of Bavaria, or Sisi was her nickname. And this was, they actually, I think, loved each other. But at that time, and in history, the marriage of royals, because he was the emperor, his father died, and so he became the emperor in his 20s. And marriage was part of unifying the empire. And because Sisi or Elizabeth was from the Hungarian side, that was important to show a unity of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. So if he married a woman from Austria or Vienna, the people in Hungary would feel all the more remote and neglected. But this marriage was to send symbolically, we are united as an empire. And eventually Hungary had their own parliament, but the foreign affairs and the army, that was controlled by the emperor out of Vienna. Now, last night, Nancy and we watched a new Netflix series called The Empress, and it features these two individuals and their marriage and how they met, and it's a 2-season series. So if you're interested in this part of history, it's a wonderful series. At least the first episode was very captivating to us, and I'm sure the next segments will be as well. So much happened here that led up to up to World War I. So World War I was actually triggered when the nephew of Franz Joseph was assassinated in Sarajevo. That was the one of the triggers of World War I. But the war and the issues had been brewing for quite a while, because Serbia was a powerful region in Hungary, and they wanted their independence. So they were looking for a way to achieve independence. And so lots of history here. Now, after World War I, Croatia became part of the Kingdom of Yugoslavia, and that existed if we rolled into World War II. Germany invaded Croatia, and many of the leaders in Croatia sided with the Germans, and they, because the Germans represented the West, and Croatia was very concerned about Serbia and the East. So Germany was fighting communism. This played well in many parts of Croatia, and there were bitter struggles between the fascist regime within Croatia. So those loyal to the Germans created a fascist state within Croatia, and then there was an anti-fascist element as well taking place. And And the anti-fascists were led by a communist revolutionary named Joseph Tito. And so he was a partisan fighting the Germans and leading soldiers during World War II, with help from England. In fact, they sent him arms to help defeat the Germans. In 1946, Croatia again became part of Yugoslavia under General Tito as the president. And he ruled as president of Yugoslavia up until 1980 when he died. And he was an interesting guy because he was a communist, and he looked to Russia for advice, but he didn't follow the Russian advice or as other parts of the Iron Curtain did. And because I think because he'd been fighting, he'd been pro-communist even in World War II, the Russians treated Yugoslavia different than they treated Poland or the Czech Republic. So I had friends that came from Poland, and they had to escape and sneak away after in the 1950s and 1960s to get out of Poland, where from my understanding, if you were a Yugoslav and in 1975 you said, well, we're moving the family to America, they'd say, oh, have good luck, have a good time. You could the restrictions that the Poles and the other parts of Eastern Europe had, Yugoslavia was able to avoid some of that. Now, in 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. 1991, Croatia leaders sever ties with Yugoslavia and the beginning of the war for independence. And this led on, and many things were happening in Yugoslavia at the time. We had eventually the U.S. Military with President Clinton, they were taking the sides to fight the Serbian army, and we did not send soldiers on the ground, but we sent plenty of airplanes that were shooting and destroying Serbian tanks. So we were part of that effort, as were some of the other European countries. So here we have arriving at Zagreb, the capital, and it's a beautiful city. There's the cathedral there in the middle. And the day that we arrived, it was a Thursday or Friday, and young people were arriving at the cathedral square when we were walking by. And here we see two groups of young people, like high school or early 20s. And there was 8 or 10 such groups. I took photos here of 2. But they come from different regions. I mentioned those 17 mini regions of Croatia. These young adults came from different regions because they have different traditional attire representing their region, and having a good time. This was here, it was like it's not as loud and boisterous as Oktoberfest, but they were there having a good time. So, and here we have a few blocks away, we have the commercial center of Zagreb called Market Square. And Zagreb was actually 2 different towns before it was merged. And one was a commercial town, and the other was, think of it as a religious town with monasteries and the cathedral. So they eventually merged to be a single town of Zagreb. So here we have in the commercial square, we have these wonderful buildings that are now offices or apartments, probably more offices, but they were probably once more mainly apartments. But here we have a large statue of Count Joseph Jelačić, and he was a leader in the military in the 1800s, and he won at least one battle against the Serbs. And so this statue was here up until President Tito came to power. And Tito said, let's take this statue down, melt it away, because we're no longer Croatians, we're no longer Serbs, we are Yugoslavs. So he wanted to unify and have try to create a culture and a self-image of a unified people. And he succeeded to a certain extent, but the independence, the cultural differences, once Croatia achieved their independence, they actually had not taken the statue and melted it down. They just had put it in a warehouse. So they had cut it up to put it in the warehouse, but they brought it back, welded it back together, and here we have Count Delcek back on his horse. Now, I took a bike tour of Zagreb, and it's a great way to see a European city. And the picture on the left is the woman with the hat in her basket. She was our leader of the bike tour, and there were 8 or 9 of us that were on the tour. And in a bike tour, you're not actually riding the bike all that much. So this was a 2-hour tour, and we might have been pedaling for 20 minutes total, because oftentimes we would pedal for 2 or 3 minutes and then would stop and talk for 10 minutes about what we're seeing, and then we might pedal for 2 or 3 more minutes, and never in real traffic. We were always in a parkway or walked our bikes across one street. In many cases, you're not pedaling in real traffic in many situations, but you can check that out ahead of time. If you certainly don't want to be pedaling in a very crowded roadway. So, but here we are with learning about Zagreb, and part of it is what you learn from your tour guide, not only about what you're seeing, but what their life looks like. So here we are, our tour guide took us to the Opera House, and this was built in 1895. So the Empress Elizabeth, this mustard yellow was her favorite color. So they made the Opera House in Elizabeth or Cece's her preferred color. And one of the other things that our tour guide shared, that back in 1991, when the bombings of Dubrovnik were occurring, which was very traumatic, particularly for Dubrovnik, but for all of Croatia, it was traumatic. But the Serbian Air Force dropped some bombs on Zagreb. But and there was a few buildings hurt. There was some loss of life, but relative, compared to Dubrovnik, very, very minor. And our tour guide said, she was a teenager at the time, and her attitude is, well, over time, we got our independence. The Serbs are over there, we're over here, we're doing very well economically. We should live and let live and forget our past differences. We don't have to be friends, but we don't have to hate each other. But she said her 16-year-old son and his friends, they have this intense hatred of anything Serbian. And here are kids, they weren't even alive when the bombings occurred. And yet, so this hatred and anger, it carries on. And she was very concerned about this, as I'm sure we are. But I think it points to the fact that, we Americans have largely been freed from this kind of trauma on our own land. But when we think of, what's happening in the Middle East or what's happening in Ukraine, these angers and these, this anger carries on and can carry on for generation after generation. And it's we have to figure out how to deal with that, because that won't just go away on its own very easily. But as was the example that she was sharing. Now, so I mentioned that I was here as part of a singing group. My late wife, Mary, she was a singer with the Chicago Master Singers, and they were singing this was part of a 10-day singing group, and we were on the bus. I was there as a groupie. I took photographs. And on one of the days, on a Friday, the group was getting back on a bus, and it was going to take a 10-hour trip to go sing back in Montenegro. Not Montenegro, they were going to sing in a country next door, Slovenia. And so it was going to be a long day on the bus, 4 hours on the bus to get there to sing, 4 hours back. So Mary and I said, well, we said we don't feel well. We decided to stay back, and they went off and drove on their bus. So we played hooky, and we wanted to do a couple tourings of our own. And one of the first place we went to was the Magori Cemetery. And this was covered in the book by Rick Steves, the travel books. He's a wonderful travel guide. And I follow him on most of my trips around Europe. But so he recommended this cemetery as a place to visit. So the picture on the right shows us walking into the main building, and the picture on the left shows a family mourning their deceased family member, and the casket's actually riding on, it looks like an elongated golf cart. And so we didn't get any closer than this. We left them to their mourning, but we walked into other parts of the cemetery. And here is, this is a cemetery that dates back to the second half of the 1800s when it was put together. And so some people are buried in the walls here. The caskets are in the walls. Most are out on the lawns, as you'll see. And what was unique about this cemetery is back then, most cemeteries, they were dedicated either to a Roman Catholic or Orthodox, or there might be a Jewish cemetery. This cemetery, the founders in Zagreb said, everyone should be buried here. So it's, they're not separated by segment or by religion or non-religious. So everything is intermixed, which to us seems pretty normal, but was pretty radical at the time. So here we have a family, a family story of the deceased family members. On the right, we have a picture of a couple at their marriage. She's wearing her wedding veil, and he has his uniform on. And I thought perhaps he died in the war, but he had not. He had lived into the 1950s, and he had fought in World War I. But here we have a picture of them, and which the war period and his being a soldier obviously must have been important, because this was a unique sculpture created by the family in honor of their deceased loved ones. Now, the next day we did more touring in Zagreb, but that night, which was a Saturday night, the Chicago Master Singers, were singing in one of the churches. And it was this church here, this beautiful church. Now, I did not take this picture. This came off the internet. But what's so beautiful with this is the starry night, and the roof of this church. It is ceramic tiles, and you see some churches in Europe like this, including St. Stephen's in Vienna, and it's enormously expensive to do this, but it will last. These mosaics will last hundreds and hundreds of years if they're maintained correctly, as indeed it looked like here. So you can have this beautiful artwork and symbolism on the roof itself. And here we have the Chicago Master Singers singing, and my late wife is over there on the right side. So Mary passed away in 2002. And I met Nancy a year later at a widows group, and we were married last year. But so here's Mary and the singers. Here at the end, there we have the lady in the blue outfit. She wasn't feeling well that day, so she sat out, but she went in at the end. She took the bow. Mary is the redhead to the right of the woman in blue. So there's a woman with gray hair on Mary's right, but that redhead is Mary. So here after the concert, you go out. That was the last formal concert. So so we went out and had a wonderful meal and just relaxed after they sang. They had 7 concerts in 10 days. So so that really is hard work. Now, but the next morning they did go sing mass at the cathedral. So they were singing the Gloria and other parts of the mass. And here I am standing outside of the cathedral in black. And at this time, there were other people from a regions of Croatia. And now these are not the 20-year-olds. These are older, obviously older people in their, 50s and 60s. And the fellow with the black hat, he had a wineskin and giving little samples of wine in little plastic cups. And the ladies were handing out, raisins from their region of Croatia. So they were there to share with strangers. So here I was a stranger, but they wanted to share the bounty of their land. So, which is, very symbolic of meeting a stranger and sharing figs and wine. So here, so that was our last that Sunday was our last full day within the singing group. And we had the typical banquet that night. And, in most banquets, because they're singers, they wind up singing again. So just relaxing and enjoying a wonderful meal and some local entertainment. The next day, most of the singers went to the airport and flew home. Many of them were working, but Mary and I and a friend, we went to the national park in Croatia, Plitvice Lakes National Park. And this is a picture of it. And what's unique about this is you see all the lakes here. What's unique here is that the lakes maintain themselves on different levels. So here is the hotel that we stayed at. We stayed here for one night, and it was a package deal. You got your meals, your dinner, and then your breakfast the next day. And it looks like a typical, 1950 Holiday Inn. It's not a fancy building, but the staff was wonderful and the food was very good. But so the day we arrived, we spent the whole afternoon walking through the national park. And what's unique here is the 16 lakes, they're all arranged and they cascade from one into the other. And normally, in the normal geographic or geological formation, this would have all eventually just become a fast-moving river, the water flowing quickly down a slope and with like waterfalls, but it would look like a fast-moving river. But that's not the case here because of the soil and the subterranean, the materials underneath, the granite and the other clay, the other materials keep each of the lakes operating as an independent lake that flows into each other. And here we see pictures of it as well. On the left, you can see that lake is on a different level, the upper lake and then the lower lake, with just a waterfall separating the two. Here we have a bird's eye view of the walkways, and you walk for about 2 miles from the upper part all the way through the 16 lakes. It's around a 2-mile period, a 2-mile stretch. And here's a pier. In this case, you're walking along. There's no guardrails, and this is typical of Europe, that you're expected to look after your own safety. The Europeans, they don't like to put in massive protections that take away from the beauty of where you are. So you could be on a fortress and maybe there's a little wall, but you'd think in America that have a 7-foot chain link fence to protect people from climbing and falling over. The European, their attitude is you need to look after yourself. If you fall, you could call a lawyer. They're going to say it's hopeless. You're responsible for your own safety. So that's a fairly common attitude with European special sites. So here, a close-up of a lake with a little waterfall, not a massive waterfall. Beautiful children, lots of things to play with. Many Europeans travel in their own uh, in their own country, in Poland or in Croatia. The salaries are not such that people could easily go over to France or to England. The cost of travel and vacations there are much, much higher. So people travel with their families in their own local countries to a much larger extent than other countries, wealthier countries. Uh, here's a waterfall that we do see, and notice the woman at the lower left. So that puts it into context how tall that waterfall is. Now, because Croatia, when we talk about dining, and because they're so close to the Adriatic, there's lots of fish and seafood, both along the coast naturally, but even into Zagreb, that they bring fish in on a very regular basis. In a country like this, they don't have vast plains like you think of Texas or Nebraska to grow beef. So fish is a very, very big part of the diet. And dining with your family is a very common thing. As you see people vacationing, they're there dining at a nice restaurant with the kids sitting there. Kids might be sharing a little wine as they they don't they introduce wine, maybe they water it down and limit the amount, but European kids are sharing wine in a family settings very on a much more common basis than certainly we do in this country. Here is some of the wonderful dishes that are served. Here is a flashti soda, which is this is a beef dish marinated in wine and herbs. Here we have a brudette. It's a fish stew with different types of fish, onions, tomatoes, red wine. You could see a cousin of this type of food in Spain, in Barcelona. Here we have black risotto, seafood risotto made with squid and flavored with ink to give it its color. So these are traditional meals in Croatia. And to say nothing of desserts. And so every country has a whole wealth of desserts. So the pictures on the right is some of the 20 traditional dessert recipes. And there are not many Croatian restaurants in Chicago. I'm sure there's a few. There's Croatian neighborhoods on the south that historically were on the near south side in Bridgeport. But there's not a huge number of Croatians in the Chicago area compared to other parts of other countries from Europe. And I don't have a huge number of data points, but two of my co-workers from the technology world, the two fellows that I knew from Croatia, they both moved back to Croatia. 100%, the two people, 100% of them took their families back to Croatia. And they did so, they said, because they wanted their children to grow up as Croatians, to go to school in the Croatian language and they're realizing that while they loved it here in America and had very good jobs, if their kids grew up here, they'd largely be American, and Americans with a Croatian heritage, but they'd soon not speak Croatian anymore. They'd lose the rich connection with the culture and with their families back in Croatia. So I know and throughout Chicagoland, there's many schools where Polish kids go to learn Polish and maintain their Polish language going on Saturday. But the two guys I knew, they said, we're bringing our family back to Croatia. So that while the kids were young. So that's a small data point, but I think it speaks to the pride they have in their country and what a wonderful place it is to live. Even if you're making less money, the richness of the culture that they have and it's lower cost of living, lower salaries. Croatia, on the other hand, is doing quite well economically. It's not a country of heavy industry, but tourism, information technology, software developers. There's lots of things there that their talents can be applied to. So that's a rich part of living in Croatia. So here we are. Here's Nancy and I flying back after 3 weeks around the Mediterranean, including our day at Split and our spending time in Dubrovnik. So here we are flying back to the U.S. After a wonderful trip. So Joe, I'd be happy to answer any questions or comments that our listeners might have.
Thank you, Gene. That was a very good presentation. Looks like we do just have one question here. Someone commented that your photos were very lovely, and they were asking what kind of camera you use to take them.
Actually, that's just an Android phone. In the past, I'd carry around a fancier camera, but the smartphones, they do such a wonderful job. So those were taken with a phone. So and they come out very, very well.
Yeah, very nice. We did have one more question here. Were there any issues with communicating with the Croatian residents? And did a lot of them speak English?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. In Europe today, but particularly in Croatia, anyone under 40 they've learned and they speak English, the vast majority. I'm sure if you went off to a far distant rural area, that may not be true, but in the cities and the towns that we were at, essentially everyone is speaking English. They're teaching English to the kids beginning in kindergarten or first grade. So they speak Croatian, they speak English, they might speak French as well. I mean, the Europeans, they value being multilingual, and English is the kind of the international business for business, international language for business. So the Chinese are not going to learn Croatian to do business here, but the Chinese speak English, the Croatians speak English, so they can do business together very nicely, and that's true throughout Europe.
Yeah, definitely. I've noticed it when I've traveled there as well, so makes sense.
And I should add, the Croatians are very welcoming of Americans. They love that we come and visit, and they recognize that without America and President Clinton, their battles with the Serbian army might have gone the other way. They really feel that America's involvement was very instrumental in their achieving independence, and they thank us. We've been at restaurants where the server, no matter what you wear in Europe, they know that you're an American. So our servers would say, thank you, America, for helping us achieve our freedom. So they're very, very cognizant of the role that we played.
That's good. Yeah, avoiding the sometimes I know there's stereotypes about American travelers, so it's good that they're fans of ours.
Yeah, yes. And I think Americans, I think we're better travelers. The rumors of or the image we might have had, there was a book 30 years ago called The Ugly American, that we travel poorly and boastfully. I think we're doing better than we did back then.
Yeah, hopefully, I think that was all the questions. We just got a few other comments saying nice job and thank you. So yeah, thank you everyone for attending. Gene, thank you again. Wonderful presentation. So everyone, have a good rest of your day.
Well, thank you all, and thank you for the invitation. It's fun to be here.